My boyfriend ended things with me on my birthday. He didn't even show up. He sent his brother carrying a phone. The brother hit play on a voice message in front of 50+ guests. I'm not coming. I've been using you for your money this entire time. Your daddy's credit cards were the only thing that made touching you bearable. But he cut you off last month, so you're worthless to me now. 4 years of pretending to love you was torture. Imagine your entire world collapsing, not because of some natural disaster, but because the man you loved, the man you trusted with everything, decided to rip it all apart in the most public, humiliating way imaginable. And what if I told you his cruel betrayal was actually the final act in a secret, brutal test orchestrated by my own family, designed to expose his true, disgusting nature? Clark and I had been together for 4 incredible years. Or so I thought. We lived this comfortable, carefree life in a beautiful downtown apartment. My dad's monthly allowance covered most of our expenses. Rent, dinners out, spontaneous weekend trips. Clark chipped in what he could, and we never really worried about money. Life was easy, predictable, perfect. Until last March. That's when my dad just stopped. No allowance. No warning. Just silence when I called. It was like a switch flipped overnight, and our whole world, my whole world, started to unravel. Clark noticed immediately. How could he not? Suddenly, I was picking up extra shifts, frantically trying to cover our bills. He actually suggested we find a cheaper place, but I refused. I was determined to maintain our lifestyle, burning through my savings while I tried to figure out what was going on with my dad. Clark, to his credit, seemed to step up. He stopped suggesting expensive restaurants, started cooking more. He canceled our gym membership, saying we could run outside instead. He'd question every grocery item that wasn't absolutely necessary. I honestly thought he was being supportive, practical. Clark was always good with budgets, so I just assumed he was helping us adjust to what I believed were temporary circumstances. I even appreciated it. I thought, wow, he's really got my back. But then, things shifted. Clark started becoming increasingly distant. He'd stay out later, offer vague explanations. When I'd ask about his day, I'd get short, clipped answers, or he'd just change the subject entirely. Weekends became tense. Any activity I suggested seemed to irritate him. I rationalized it, told myself it was just the stress of our new financial reality. We were both working more, spending less time together. I kept clinging to the hope that once I sorted things out with my dad, everything would go back to normal. Clark just needed time to adjust, right? Then July rolled around, and a new character entered the stage, Avery. Clark couldn't stop talking about her. Avery bought a new car. Avery was planning expensive vacations. He seemed utterly fascinated by her lifestyle, constantly bringing her up. I found it annoying, sure, but never suspicious. Why would I? All summer I kept trying to reach my dad. He'd answer sometimes, but the conversations were always brief, rushed. Busy now, call you back, he'd say. He never did. I left voicemails practically begging him to tell me if I'd done something wrong, if I'd upset him. He never ever explained why the money had stopped. Clark, meanwhile, grew more and more impatient with my family situation. He'd tell me I needed to fix whatever was broken, instead of depleting our savings. He even accused me of being too proud to admit my mistakes. Arguments about money became routine, and soon enough he started sleeping on the couch. By October, Clark barely spoke to me. The only time he opened his mouth was to complain about some expense or other. He'd eat dinner in front of the TV, glued to his phone. My birthday was in November, and when I suggested we plan something special, something to reconnect, he just shut me down. We can't afford celebrations anymore, he said flatly. That stung. So, I started working even more extra shifts. I was determined to make my birthday special, to salvage something. I made reservations at the restaurant where we had our first date, a place full of memories. I told Clark weeks in advance, and he agreed to go. I was actually excited. I thought, this is it. We'll reconnect. We'll remember why we fell in love. Saturday night arrived. I was there waiting, a hopeful knot in my stomach. 20 minutes past our reservation time. Clark was never late for anything important. I texted him, my fingers trembling slightly. No response. The hostess kept coming by, asking if I wanted to order, while tables around me filled with laughing couples. My heart sank deeper with each passing minute. Then I saw him. Thomas, Clark's brother. He walked into the restaurant, phone in hand, looking straight at our table. He approached, placed his phone down, and without a single word of greeting hit play. Clark's voice filled the stunned silence of the restaurant. "I'm not coming tonight. I've been using you for your money this whole time. But your dad cut you off, so there's no point anymore. 4 years of pretending to love you was exhausting. I'm already with someone who's actually worth my time. Don't contact me again." My blood ran cold. But it didn't stop there. His voice continued, spewing venom about how pathetic I'd become without family money, how he'd been seeing someone, Avery of course, for months and was moving in with her. He said I should have fixed things with my father instead of expecting him to live like we were poor. Every single person in that restaurant heard it. The server stopped mid-step, staring. The elderly couple at the next table looked absolutely mortified. Children at nearby tables asked their parents what was happening. I looked at Thomas, my eyes wide with shock, searching for an explanation. He just shrugged. "He said to make sure everyone heard it," Thomas said, his voice flat. "I don't remember walking out. I just remember grabbing my purse, the world spinning around me, and needing to escape. As I stumbled out, my phone buzzed. A text from Clark. A cold, clinical list of items he planned to pick up from our apartment. That's when it hit me. He wanted to humiliate me. Publicly. Because he truly believed I was worthless without my dad's money. He sent his own brother to deliver the message in the most devastating way possible, ensuring everyone knew exactly how he felt about me. But that idiot, that absolute moron, had missed the most important question. He never once wondered why my dad had really stopped sending money. He just assumed I'd screwed up, accepted it as fact, and abandoned me. He bought into his own narrative. Oh, Clark. Clark was about to find out what happens when you humiliate someone whose father was simply checking if you actually loved his daughter, or just her bank account. Oh my God, you guys. The response to my initial post? Absolutely insane. I'm literally laughing, crying at all your comments calling Clark a gold digger, because that's exactly what that loser turned out to be. But trust me, it gets so much worse than I originally posted. After I walked out of that restaurant, I drove home feeling like I was trapped in some twisted nightmare. The whole thing was so calculated, so cruel. Sending his brother? Making sure everyone heard? That's next-level psycho behavior, something I obviously never saw coming. When I got back to our apartment, Clark had already been there. Like a thief in the night. Half his stuff was gone. His PlayStation, the expensive coffee maker I bought. All missing. There was a note on the counter, a list of more crap he wanted with specific times he planned to show up. But here's where it gets absolutely insane. I'm sitting there, staring at this damn note, trying to process what had just happened, and my phone starts blowing up with texts. Not from Clark. From his mother, Marie. His mom is texting me, asking if I'm okay, saying she heard what happened. And for a split second I thought, oh thank God. At least someone in his family has some decency. Wrong. So wrong. She starts going on about how Clark told her I'd been acting strange lately, how he discovered I was seeing someone else behind his back. I had to read those texts 3 times. 3 times. Because I just couldn't believe what I was seeing. This piece of work had told his entire family that I cheated on him, that he'd found out about my affair. And that's why he left me in such a dramatic way. Because he was heartbroken and betrayed. So now his whole family thinks I'm some cheating Jezebel who destroyed their precious son. They were all rallying around him like he was the victim. His mom was texting me about how disappointed she was, how Clark is devastated but trying to stay strong. I was shaking with rage. 4 years. 4 years of treating his family like my own. Christmas dinners, birthday parties, family vacations. And this is what I get. Him lying to them, fabricating this elaborate story so he doesn't have to admit he left me for someone he thought had more money. I called Clark immediately. And he actually picked up. He probably thought I was going to beg him to come back. Instead, I started screaming at him about his disgusting lies to his family. And this dude, this absolute audacity-filled idiot, had the nerve to tell me it was easier for everyone if his family thought I cheated rather than getting into complicated financial stuff. He said his parents were already asking too many questions, and telling them about money problems would just create more drama. So, he decided it was simpler to make me the villain. That way, his family wouldn't judge him for his decision. He actually told me I should just go along with it, that it would make the breakup cleaner for everyone involved. If I just let his family think I cheated, they'd stop asking questions and we could both move on. I hung up on him. My hands were still shaking, but a new kind of resolve was building inside me. I immediately started calling his family members one by one to tell them the truth. But guess what? Clark had gotten to them first. His mom, his dad, Thomas, his sister Melanie. They all had the exact same story. I was the cheater. Clark was the heartbroken victim. And they weren't interested in hearing my side. His sister Melanie, who I thought I was close to, actually told me Clark had shown them proof of my affair. Apparently, some text between me and a male coworker, completely taken out of context, twisted to look suspicious. These were normal, professional conversations about projects, but Clark had convinced his family they were evidence of me being unfaithful. The worst part was talking to his dad, Thomas. I'd always had a great relationship with him. This man had walked me down the aisle at his daughter's wedding because my dad was traveling. He called me his bonus daughter, always made me feel like part of the family. And now he's telling me how disappointed he is in my choices, how I broke his son's heart. I tried explaining what really happened. About the restaurant, about the voice message, about Clark leaving me for Avery. But Thomas just kept saying Clark had already told them about my lies and manipulation. Apparently, Clark had prepared them for the possibility that I might try to twist the story to make myself look better. So now, I'm not just dealing with being publicly humiliated and abandoned. I'm dealing with an entire family that thinks I'm a cheating liar. All because Clark decided it was more convenient than admitting the truth about why he really left. But here's the thing. Clark didn't count on me. I am not some helpless victim who's going to just take this lying down. If he wants to play dirty, if he wants to destroy my reputation with his family, then he is about to find out exactly what happens when you mess with someone who has absolutely nothing left to lose. See, Clark made one crucial mistake in his little lie campaign. He forgot that I still had access to all our shared accounts, and 4 years' worth of actual undeniable evidence about what our relationship was really like. While Clark was busy spinning his sob story about being betrayed, I was gathering real proof of what had actually happened. Bank statements showing that I paid for most of our expenses. Photos from social media showing us happy together right up until the money stopped. Text conversations between us where Clark never once mentioned being suspicious about cheating. And the best part? I found Clark's Instagram messages with Avery. Hundreds of them. Heart emojis. Inside jokes. Plans to meet up. All of it while he was still living with me, still pretending to be committed to our relationship. So Clark wasn't just a gold digger. He was a cheater. And he had the absolute balls to accuse me of cheating to cover up his own infidelity and his real reasons for leaving me. I sent screenshots of these messages to his mom, Marie, along with a very detailed explanation of what had actually happened. I told her exactly how her precious son had humiliated me in that restaurant, how he'd been seeing Avery behind my back, and how he'd made up the cheating story to avoid admitting he'd left me for someone he thought had better financial prospects. Marie's response? To tell me I was obsessed and delusional, that I needed to move on and stop harassing their family. She actually said Clark had warned them that I might become unstable after the breakup and try to cause problems for him and Avery. That's when I finally realized. Clark had played this perfectly. Not only had he stolen 4 years of my life, but he'd managed to turn his entire family against me, painting me as the crazy ex-girlfriend who just couldn't accept that the relationship was over. You guys are absolutely killing me with these comments. And I need to tell you what happened next because this story gets so much more insane, and honestly I'm still processing how truly evil Clark turned out to be. After Clark's family completely dismissed all my evidence and called me delusional, I was sitting in my apartment, genuinely feeling like I was going crazy. How do you fight against someone who's rewritten history so completely that even people who've known you for years think you're lying? But then my mom called. And the first thing she said was, "We know what Clark did to his family, and we're not letting him get away with it." Turns out, my parents had been in contact with Clark's parents for years. Exchanged numbers at family gatherings, followed each other on Facebook. The whole thing. My mom had seen Marie's posts about her poor son being betrayed by his cheating girlfriend. And she was livid. My mom told me she'd already called Marie directly to set the record straight, and the conversation had been absolutely explosive. Marie had apparently doubled down on Clark's lies, insisting her son would never lie about something like that, and that my family was just trying to protect me from the consequences of my own actions. So my mom did something that made me simultaneously proud and terrified. She invited Clark's entire family over for dinner to discuss the situation like adults and get to the truth. And here's the crazy part. They actually agreed to come. Marie, Thomas, Melanie, even Clark's grandmother, Veda, who I absolutely adored. They all showed up at my parents' house on Sunday evening, probably thinking they were going to confront my family about raising a lying cheater. My mom told me later that the dinner was like a war zone from the moment everyone sat down. Marie immediately started talking about how disappointed she was in me, how she trusted me with her son's heart. Thomas went on about how he'd welcomed me into their family and felt betrayed by my actions. But my dad? My dad had prepared for this. He had printed out everything. Bank statements, social media screenshots, text message threads, even security camera footage from our apartment building, showing when Clark had been coming and going during the months he was supposedly being faithful to me. When my dad laid all this evidence out on the dining room table, Clark's family went silent. Marie, ever the loyal mother, tried to argue that the evidence could be faked. But Thomas, Clark's dad, started looking through the papers, and his expression completely changed. The Instagram messages between Clark and Avery were particularly damning. Hundreds of them, going back months before my dad had even stopped the allowance. Heart emojis, plans to meet up when I was at work. Clark complaining about having to pretend everything was fine at home, while he figured out his exit strategy. But the worst part? A message where Clark explicitly told Avery that he was just waiting for the right moment to leave me, and that he needed to make sure I looked like the bad guy, so his family wouldn't judge him for abandoning a 4-year relationship so suddenly. Melanie was reading over her dad's shoulder, and she just started crying. She said she couldn't believe her own brother had planned something so cruel and calculated. Clark's grandmother, Veda, just kept shaking her head, whispering, "This isn't the boy I raised." That's when my mom dropped the real bomb. She told Clark's family that my dad had stopped the allowance on purpose. It was a test to see how Clark would treat me when things got tough. She explained that my parents had been suspicious of Clark's motives for months and wanted to see his true character. Thomas asked my dad directly if this was true, and my dad confirmed everything. He said they'd been documenting Clark's behavior throughout the test, and that his reaction had been worse than they'd ever imagined. Marie started getting defensive again, saying that testing someone's relationship was manipulative and unfair. But my mom shut that down immediately. "We didn't test Clark's love," she said, her voice cutting. "We tested his character. And he failed spectacularly by choosing cruelty over compassion." Then my dad played them the recordings. My phone conversations with Clark, where he'd been tearing apart my character, bragging about how much better Avery was than me. Hearing their own son's voice, being so vicious, so calculating about someone he'd claimed to love for 4 years, was devastating for his family. But Clark's family wasn't ready to admit they'd been wrong. Thomas started arguing that even if Clark had handled things badly, I should have been honest about the family money situation instead of letting him think there was a real crisis. That's when I lost it. I'd been sitting there, listening to them make excuses for their son's cruelty, and I couldn't take it anymore. I stood up, my voice shaking but loud. "Clark never asked me what was happening with my family," I yelled. "He just assumed I'd screwed up and started treating me like garbage." I told them that their precious son had humiliated me in front of strangers, lied to his own family about why he left, and tried to destroy my reputation to cover up his own cheating and gold-digging behavior. Marie started yelling back, saying I was being dramatic, and relationships end for lots of reasons. She said maybe Clark had made mistakes, but that didn't make him a monster. But Melanie was done defending her brother. She said she'd always thought something was off about how quickly Clark had moved on with Avery, and now she understood why. She apologized to me, her voice thick with tears, and said she was ashamed of how their family had treated me. Thomas, though, was still trying to find ways to excuse Clark's behavior. He said maybe Clark had been confused and scared about the money situation, and hadn't handled it well. He suggested we were all overreacting, that young people make mistakes in relationships. That's when my dad got really angry. He said what Clark had done wasn't a mistake. It was a deliberate pattern of manipulation and cruelty that revealed his true character. He told Thomas that any man who would publicly humiliate a woman he claimed to love wasn't someone who deserved excuses or forgiveness. The argument got so heated that Clark's grandmother, Veda, finally spoke up, her voice surprisingly firm. She told everyone to stop yelling. She said she'd heard enough and that she was deeply ashamed of her grandson's behavior. She looked directly at me, her eyes full of sorrow, and apologized for how their family had treated me. But Marie wasn't ready to back down. She said that even if Clark had made mistakes, my family had no right to test their relationship in secret. She accused my parents of being manipulative and controlling. My mom absolutely went off on her. She said that any parent who raised a son capable of the cruelty Clark had shown me had no business lecturing other people about manipulation. She told Marie that Clark's behavior reflected the values he'd learned at home. The dinner ended with both families screaming at each other. Thomas was defending Marie. My dad was defending my mom. And I was in the middle, trying not to have a complete breakdown. But something important had happened. Clark's lies were starting to fall apart. Melanie and Veda were on my side now. And even Thomas seemed shaken by the evidence of his son's planning and deception. The next day, Melanie called me directly. She said she'd confronted Clark about everything, and the conversation had been horrible. Clark had initially tried to stick to his lies, but when Melanie showed him she'd seen all the evidence, he finally admitted the truth. According to Melanie, Clark had broken down and confessed that he'd made up the cheating story because he was embarrassed about leaving me for financial reasons. He told her that he panicked when his family started asking questions, and thought it would be easier to make me the villain. But even in his confession, Clark was still trying to justify his actions. He told Melanie that the relationship wasn't working anyway, and that the money situation had just been the final straw. He'd insisted that I was better off without him, and that everyone needed to move on. Melanie said she'd never seen her brother be so cold and calculating about another person's feelings. She told him that she was disgusted by his behavior, and that he needed to tell his parents the truth immediately. But Clark refused. He said admitting to his lies now would just create more drama and hurt more people. He told Melanie that I would get over it eventually, and that dredging up the truth would only make things worse for everyone. That's when Melanie realized that her brother wasn't just a liar. He was completely lacking in empathy or remorse for what he'd done to me. She said it was like talking to a stranger who just happened to look like her brother. She told me she was going to make sure her parents knew the truth, whether Clark wanted them to or not. She said their family owed me a massive apology, and that Clark needed to face consequences for his actions. But convincing Marie and Thomas wasn't going to be easy. They'd built their whole understanding of the situation around Clark being the victim. Admitting they were wrong meant acknowledging that they treated me horribly based on lies. Meanwhile, Clark was apparently telling Avery that his crazy ex-girlfriend was trying to destroy his relationships with his family by spreading lies about him. Avery was even posting on social media about how sad it was when people couldn't accept that relationships end, and had to create drama to get attention. So now I was fighting a war on multiple fronts. Trying to clear my name with Clark's family, dealing with his lies to his new girlfriend, and watching him continue to play the victim while painting me as the unstable ex who couldn't move on. Last update, guys. I cannot even begin to describe what happened this week, because Clark's entire life just imploded in the most spectacular way possible. And I am living for every single moment of his pathetic downfall. So, remember how Melanie was trying to convince her parents that Clark had lied about everything? Well, she didn't have to try very hard, because my dad decided to take matters into his own hands. He called Thomas, Clark's dad, directly. My dad told Thomas he had something important to discuss about Clark, and that they needed to meet in person. Thomas agreed, probably thinking my dad wanted to apologize or work things out. Wrong. So incredibly wrong. My dad showed up at Thomas's office with a folder. A thick, damning folder full of evidence that would destroy Clark's lies forever. But it wasn't just the Instagram messages and recordings this time. My dad had been documenting Clark's behavior for months during the test, and he had evidence that would blow Thomas's mind. Photos of Clark going out to expensive restaurants with Avery, while telling me we couldn't afford to eat out. Credit card statements showing Clark buying gifts for Avery, while complaining about our budget to me. But the worst part? A recording my dad had made during one of our family barbecues. Clark casually asking my mom about inheritance laws and how family money gets passed down. Clark had literally been calculating my worth as a future wife based on what he thought he could eventually inherit from my family. Thomas listened to everything in complete silence. My dad said you could watch Clark's father's face change, slowly but surely, as he realized his son wasn't just a liar. He was a calculating, cold-hearted gold digger who had played their entire family. But here's where it gets absolutely insane. After Thomas heard all the evidence, he didn't just apologize to my dad. He called Clark immediately and told him to come to his office right now for an emergency family meeting. Clark showed up, probably thinking his dad wanted to discuss the drama I was causing for their family. Instead, Thomas played him the recordings of his own voice, being vicious about me, calculating about my family's money. Clark's face apparently went white as he realized his lies had completely fallen apart. Thomas started yelling at Clark, his voice booming with disgust. He told Clark how ashamed he was that he'd raised a son capable of such cruelty and deception. He said he'd never been more ashamed of anyone in his life, and that Clark had betrayed everything their family stood for. But Clark, in typical Clark fashion, tried to defend himself. He started arguing that the test had been unfair, and that his reaction was understandable given the circumstances. He told his dad that everyone was overreacting, and that relationships end badly sometimes. That's when Thomas delivered the final blow. He told Clark that he was moving out of the apartment immediately, because Thomas wasn't paying rent for someone who could treat another person with such calculated cruelty. Clark started panicking because he couldn't afford the apartment on his own, and Thomas, without an ounce of sympathy, said, "That's your problem to figure out." Then Thomas said he was also taking back the car he'd been helping Clark pay for, because he wasn't supporting someone with such terrible character. Clark started begging, making pathetic excuses, saying he'd learned from his mistakes and would do better. But Thomas said it was too late. Clark had shown who he really was, and there were no second chances for that level of cruelty and manipulation. So, within 24 hours, Clark went from having a nice apartment and reliable transportation to being basically homeless and carless. And the best part? He was too proud to tell Avery what had happened, so he had to scramble to find somewhere to stay without admitting his family had completely disowned him. According to Melanie, Clark has been staying with his old college roommate, Hugo, and telling Avery that he's temporarily between apartments while he looks for a better place. He's been taking Ubers everywhere, claiming his car is in the shop for repairs. But Clark's lies started falling apart when Avery wanted to see his apartment and meet his family. Clark had to make up excuse after excuse about why that was impossible right now. And Avery was starting to get very suspicious about his living situation. That's when Clark made the single stupidest decision of his pathetic life. He started calling me, begging me to help him explain things to Avery. He wanted me to confirm his fake story about why we broke up, and make him look less crazy to his new girlfriend. When Clark called me the first time, I was so shocked I almost hung up immediately. But then I realized, this was it. This was my chance to destroy him completely, to watch him squirm. So I stayed on the line. And I let him grovel. Clark started with his usual garbage about how he'd made mistakes, but that we could both move on and be mature about the situation. He said he just needed me to have one conversation with Avery to clear up some misunderstandings about our relationship. I started laughing. A cold, hard laugh that surprised even myself. I told Clark that the only misunderstanding was him thinking I would ever help him with anything after what he'd done to me. I told him he was a pathetic loser who had destroyed his own life through his own greed and cruelty. Clark started getting angry, demanding that I help him because we'd meant something to each other for 4 years. He said I owed him basic decency, and that I was being vindictive by refusing to help. That's when I really let him have it. I told Clark that he'd thrown away 4 years of love for money that wasn't even real. That he'd humiliated me in front of strangers. that he'd lied to his entire family about me being a cheater. I told him he deserved everything that was happening to him. Clark started crying on the phone, begging me to remember the good times we'd had together. He said he knew he'd made mistakes, but that deep down I knew he wasn't a bad person. I told Clark that the test had revealed exactly what kind of person he was. Someone who would abandon and destroy someone he claimed to love the moment it became convenient. I said he was selfish, calculating, and cruel, and that his family was right to disown him. Clark got desperate. He started offering to tell Avery the truth about why we broke up if I would just help him keep his living situation secret. He even said he would admit to his family that he'd lied about me cheating if I would cover for him about being kicked out. I told Clark that I wouldn't help him deceive another woman the way he deceived me. I said Avery deserved to know what kind of person she was dating, and what happens to people who trust him. That's when Clark started screaming at me, calling me a vindictive bitch who couldn't accept that our relationship was over. He said I was trying to destroy his life out of jealousy, and that I needed to move on. I started laughing even harder. I told Clark that I wasn't destroying his life. He'd done that all by himself through his own choices. I said I was actually grateful he'd shown me who he really was before I wasted any more time on him. Clark kept calling back from different numbers when I blocked him. Each conversation got more desperate, more pathetic. He started offering me money to help him, then threatening to tell people I was harassing him, then going back to begging and crying. During our last conversation, Clark was completely broken down. He admitted that Avery was starting to ask questions he couldn't answer, and that his friend Hugo was getting tired of him staying on his couch. He said he didn't know what he was going to do if his lies kept falling apart. I told Clark that maybe he should have thought about the consequences before he decided to be such a cruel, calculating piece of work. I said he'd made his choices and now he got to live with them. But the absolute best part happened when Avery somehow got my number and called me directly. She said Clark had mentioned me as his ex-girlfriend, and that she wanted to clear the air about something she'd heard. I was so excited I could barely contain myself. I told Avery that I'd be happy to tell her the truth about Clark and our relationship. I explained everything. The restaurant humiliation, the lies to his family, the months of him treating me like garbage when he thought I didn't have money. Avery was quiet for a long time. Then she said that Clark's story about our breakup had been completely different. He told her that I was unstable and obsessive, and that he'd had to end things for his own safety. I sent Avery screenshots of Clark's Instagram messages where he'd been flirting with her, while still living with me. I told her about the test my parents had done, and how Clark had failed it by choosing cruelty over loyalty. Avery said she was starting to understand why Clark had been so evasive about his living situation and family relationships. She thanked me for being honest with her and said she had a lot to think about. The very next day, Melanie called me laughing, because Clark had shown up at his parents' house, crying and begging them to take him back. He'd admitted that Avery had broken up with him after talking to me, and that he had nowhere else to go. Marie and Thomas told Clark that he'd made his choices, and now he had to live with the consequences. They said he'd destroyed every relationship in his life through his own selfishness, and that they weren't going to enable him anymore. Clark is apparently staying in cheap hotels now, using what little savings he has, trying to figure out his next move. But here's the part that makes me laugh the most. Clark still doesn't know about the inheritance my dad mentioned. He threw away a relationship with someone whose family could have set him up for life. And he did it for someone with a slightly better salary than me. My parents started the monthly allowance again, by the way. Not because I need it, but because they wanted to make sure I knew that people who actually love you don't abandon you when things get tough. Clark is learning that lesson the hard way, and I couldn't be happier about it. So I want to hear from you. Have you ever had to deal with a betrayal this deep? Or face someone who just refused to admit their own bad choices? What would you have done in my situation? Let me know in the comments below. I'm really curious to read your thoughts.